The verdict cost 40 silver, and Junia Varo found the price by accident, in a margin, 3 weeks into work that was supposed to be about grain. She was 26 and new, and she had been sitting in the records vault of the civic order for those 3 weeks doing the least glamorous work. The order had reconciling the district court's fee ledgers against the treasury's receipts, a task so tedious it was given only to the newest auditor magistrates and the ones being punished, and Junia was the former. She was a small, sharp-featured young woman with ink-black hair pinned severely back, dressed in the plain slate-gray robe and single silver cord of a junior of the order, and she had the specific overneat handwriting of a person who had clawed her way up from a District 7 broker's counting house into the civic order on nothing but the quality of her arithmetic, and knew it, and could not afford a single mistake. She did not make mistakes. That was the entire basis of her existence. Which was why the margin stopped her cold. A District 9 assault case closed 8 months back, defendant acquitted, ordinary, except the court's fee ledger recorded a filing payment on the day of acquittal from the defendant of 40 silver, and 40 silver was not a filing fee. Filing fees were 2 silver, 4 for a complex case. 40 silver was 20 times the number that belonged in that column, entered in a clean hand as though it belonged there, reconciled against a treasury receipt that did not exist, because Junia checked twice and the treasury had never received it. 40 silver had gone into the District 9 court on the day a man walked free, and had never reached the city, and had simply evaporated somewhere between the ledger and the coffer, in the exact space where an acquittal had happened. Junia Varo sat in the cold lamplight of the records vault and looked at the number for a long time, and felt the specific dropping sensation of a person who has found a single thread and understands, before she has pulled it at all, that it is attached to something very large, because one wrong 40 was a clerk's error. But she had already, without deciding to, run her eye down the column, and it was not one. There were others, acquittals with filing fees that were not filing fees. Sentences reduced with the same strange 40s and 80s blooming in the margins beside them. A pattern, faint and careful, and everywhere, once you knew its shape. The price of a verdict, paid at the door of the court, vanishing before it reached the city. She should have taken it to her supervisor. That was the procedure, and Junia lived by procedure, because procedure was the ladder she had climbed. She did not take it to her supervisor. She would understand why later and be grateful for the instinct and be a little afraid of it, because some part of her, 3 weeks into the civic order, had already learned not to trust the rung directly above her own. Instead, the thread was taken from her, gently, by the one hand in a cura she could not have anticipated, 3 days after she found it and before she had told a living soul. A summons came to her cell in the junior's hall, on gray paper with a black seal she had seen only on the city's founding documents, and it instructed Junia Varo to attend the High Magistrate, not her supervisor, not the senior auditor. The High Magistrate of the civic order, the head of the whole apparatus, the most powerful person in Akira, summoning a junior 3 weeks into the job, which did not happen, which had perhaps never happened, and Junia walked the long marble corridors to the magistrate's chambers with her heart going hard and her mind running frantically through everything she'd done wrong and finding only the one thing she'd done right, which was notice a number. Lethira Vale received her alone, in a high stone room lined with books older than the city, at a desk of dark wood bare except for a single lamp, and Junia saw with a lurch a copy of the District 9 fee ledger. The High Magistrate was not what Junia expected. She had expected age, grandeur, distance. Instead, she found a woman of perhaps 50, straight-backed and unhurried, with dark hair going elegantly gray and a face that was handsome and composed and gave away absolutely nothing, and eyes that, when they lifted from the ledger to Junia, held a quality of attention so complete and so patient that Junia felt, for one disorienting moment, like the only object that had ever been fully looked at. It was not unkind, it was simply total, the attention of someone with a great deal of time and the habit of spending it precisely. Junia would spend years afterward trying to name what had been wrong about that gaze and never quite manage it because nothing had been wrong about it. It had only been deeper than a gaze had any business being. "You found the 40 silver," Vale said, not a question. Her voice was low and exact. "In 3 weeks doing reconciliation work that 4 auditors before you did without noticing anything, and you told no one. Sit, magistrate. I want to understand the shape of you before I decide what to do with what you found." Junia sat. "I was going to report it, High Magistrate, through procedure." "You were not," Vale said without heat. "Or not yet. You looked at the column, you saw it was a pattern, and something told you the pattern ran up through the people who would receive your report, so you held it. That instinct is the most valuable thing about you, and I want you to understand that I am aware of it, so that you do not mistake me for one of the rungs you were right not to trust. The patient eyes did not blink. I am going to task you personally, outside the ordinary chain, reporting only to me. There is a network in the city selling verdicts, magistrates, guard captains, customs officers working together for a long time. The ordinary apparatus has failed to find it for the simplest of reasons. The ordinary apparatus contains it. You found its edge by accident because you are new enough not to be part of it and sharp enough to see it and frightened enough of the wrong things to keep quiet. I am giving you the whole thread. Pull it. Bring me the network. Report to no one but me. It was the most extraordinary moment of Junia Varo's life, the head of the civic order, handing a 3-week junior the authority to investigate the order itself, and she was too dazzled by it to ask the question she would give anything later to have asked. Why her? Why a junior with no protection instead of a trusted senior with resources? Why someone perfectly deniable? She did not ask. She said yes because it was the chance her whole cloying life had been for, and Lethira Vale watched her say it with an expression Junia read as approval and would, in time, revise. The thread ran exactly where Vale had said it ran, and pulling it taught Junia Varo the city she had been too junior to see, which was a city with a second set of books behind the first. She worked it the only way she knew, which was arithmetic, because arithmetic did not lie and could not be bribed and left a trail that intimidation could not erase. She matched vanished forties against verdicts, verdicts against magistrates, magistrates against the guard captains who brought the cases and the customs officers who did the district's real business, and slowly, over 6 careful weeks, in the cold of the records vault at night, the network drew itself. It was large. It was old, 15 years at least. She could trace the forties back that far before the ledgers thinned. And it was woven through people Junia had been taught to respect. 2 senior district magistrates, a customs controller, and this was the one that cost her a sleepless night, the senior auditor who had trained her in her first week, a kind, tired, avuncular man named Ostrek who had shown her where the good tea was kept and how the vault's index worked, and whose own hand, she found, appeared in the reconciliation of a dozen of the vanished forties, smoothing them, making them disappear into the treasury's clean columns. Ostrek was the machine's accountant. The man who had been kind to her was the man who made the theft invisible, and had perhaps been assigned to train her precisely so the network could watch what the new junior noticed. She confronted no one. She was not a fool, and Vale's warning sat behind everything. The apparatus contains it. Instead, she built the case the way she built everything, in silence, in numbers, until it was unbreakable, and the network, which was old and careful and had survived 15 years by knowing when it was being watched, began in the 8th week to notice her. A witness she had meant to see, a court clerk who'd entered too many of the forties, was transferred to a coastal posting and sailed before she could reach him. Her vault access was quietly narrowed by an order she couldn't trace. And one night, walking back to the juniors' hall through the dark of District 7, Junia became aware of 2 men behind her who matched their pace to hers through 3 turnings, and she stopped in a lit doorway with her heart in her throat and stood there, visible, refusing to walk into the dark, until they thought better of it and were gone. She was shaking when she reached her cell. She was 26, and she had a network of powerful men who had killed the truth for 15 years, now aware that a junior with good handwriting was pulling their thread, and she had exactly one protector, and her protector was the one person in Akira strong enough to be worth having. She went to Vale, and Vale listened to the account of the vanished witness and the narrowed access and the 2 men in the dark with that same total patient attention, and said only, "They are frightened. Frightened networks make errors. You will have your last proof within the week, because a man who transfers a witness in a panic leaves the transfer order, and a transfer order is a signature." She was right, of course. She was always exactly right, and it should have comforted Junia more than it did. "You are close, magistrate. Finish it, and do not walk in the dark. I will have the guard, the parts of it that are mine, see you home." And Junia, warmed by the protection, did not hear the phrase until much later, turning it over in the years afterward, "the parts of it that are mine," as though the high magistrate held in her head a precise map of which pieces of the city's apparatus belonged to her and which did not, and moved through her own government choosing her instruments, and had chosen for this a deniable junior, and was even now deciding which guards to trust with her. She found the other thing in the 9th week, and it was not part of the network, and it was the thing she would carry unspoken for the rest of her life. She was deep in the oldest ledgers by then, chasing the network's 15-year tail back through the thinning records, and in the course of it she had learned to read the shape of the city's whole justice apparatus across 2 centuries, the flow of people through it, arrest to trial to sentence to prison or gallows or freedom. And in that flow, running quiet and constant beneath everything, far older than the verdict network, far more careful, she found an anomaly that had nothing to do with 40 silver. People who left the records, not many, a few a year, every year, back and back as far as the ledgers went and clearly further, convicts, always ones with no family to ask after them, marked in a notation she had never seen in her training, transferred to special custody, and then nothing, no prison intake, no execution record, no release, no death. They entered special custody and the records simply closed over them, cleanly, permanently, with none of the mess that a real disappearance leaves, the frantic queries, the family petitions, the loose ends. These were not people the network had killed. The network was 15 years old and clumsy and left 40s in margins. This was 200 years old and left nothing at all. It was the cleanest thing Junia had ever seen in the records, and cleanness, she had learned in 9 weeks, was not the absence of a crime. It was the presence of a very good one. She almost didn't raise it, it wasn't her task. But she was, at her core, a person who could not leave a number unexplained, and so at the end of a report to Vale on the network she added, carefully, a single question, that she had noticed a long-standing special custody notation with no corresponding intake or release records, and did the High Magistrate wish her to look into it. Vale read it, and for the first time in 9 weeks, the total patient attention shifted just slightly, just for a moment, a stillness settling over the composed face like the surface of very deep water going flat, and then it passed, and the High Magistrate said, in exactly her ordinary exact voice, "No, that notation is the magistracy's own, a program of long standing, for cases that touch on matters above a district court's competence. It sits outside your remit, and outside the order's ordinary records by design, and it is not connected to your network. You have a fine eye, magistrate, keep it on the 40 silver." And that was all. It was said so smoothly, so reasonably, folded so completely into the texture of an ordinary working exchange, that Junia's fine eye slid right off it, and she said, "Yes, High Magistrate," and returned to the network, and did not think about special custody again for a long time. The thing she had brushed against, the 200-year-old current running clean beneath the city's justice, the quiet steady supply of the forgotten and the unclaimed flowing toward a use no record named, closed over behind her exactly as it had closed over the people in it, and she walked away from the largest thing in Akira without ever knowing her hand had been on it, which was, precisely, the design. The network fell in the 10th week, and it fell hard and clean and entirely justly, and Junia Varo's name was on none of it, which she understood, by then, was the point of her. Vale moved when the case was complete, and she moved the way Junia would have expected water to move if water were patient, all at once, everywhere, leaving nothing. The 2 district magistrates, the customs controller, kind tired Ostrek who had shown her the good tea, the guard captains, taken in a single grey morning, on evidence so complete that not one of them could bluff, arithmetic Junia had built brick by brick in the cold of the vault laid out in an unbreakable wall. There were trials, real ones, public ones, because Vale understood that a corruption purged in secret teaches the city nothing, while a corruption purged in daylight teaches it fear of the law. 15 years of sold verdicts came apart in the courts. People wrongly convicted were freed, people wrongly acquitted were retried, 40 silver at a time, the city's justice was made, briefly, actually just. And Junia Varo was promoted, quietly, out of the juniors' hall and into a real office with a real remit, by an order signed in the High Magistrate's own hand, and Akira never knew that the woman who broke the largest corruption in its living history was a 26-year-old with good handwriting who had noticed a number in a margin. That was correct. That was even right. An auditor who becomes famous becomes a target, and Junia's whole value was that she could work unseen. She told herself all of this, and it was true, and she was proud, and she had every reason to be, because she had done a genuinely good and genuinely brave thing, and the city was genuinely better for it. It took her until the promotion ceremony, standing in a marble hall receiving a real magistrate's double cord from Lethira Vale's own hands, to feel the first cold edge of the other thing, the thing that would sharpen for years. It began as a small question, the kind Junia's mind could never leave alone, and it was this: why had it been so easy? Not the work had been hard, the falling. 15 years the network had run, woven through the whole apparatus, invisible to 4 auditors and every senior in the order, and then a junior finds a margin and reports to the High Magistrate, and in 10 weeks the whole thing is dust. Junia had told herself it was her arithmetic, but she was, at her core, honest with numbers, and the number here did not reconcile. A network that survived 15 years does not fall in 10 weeks to one junior, however sharp, unless the ground under it had already been surveyed, unless the exact thread she'd been handed had been chosen because it was the one that unraveled the whole cloth, unless someone who understood the network completely had been waiting, patiently, for a deniable instrument sharp enough to pull it and clean enough to leave no fingerprints on the pulling. Vale had known that was the cold edge sharpening. The High Magistrate had known about the network perhaps for years, perhaps longer than the network's own members, and had let it run, and had chosen the moment of its ending, and had chosen Junia not despite her being a powerless, deniable junior, but because of it. Junia had not discovered the corruption. She had been aimed at it. Her integrity had been real, and her courage had been real, and both had been instruments in a hand that had reached down and selected them off a shelf. She had been the broom, and a broom does not choose what it sweeps, or when, or what is left standing in the corners the sweeper doesn't point it at. Because that was the other half of the cold, the half that arrived last and stayed longest. The network had fallen and the special custody current had not. Junia had brushed both. One Vale had handed her entire and let her destroy in daylight. The other Vale had folded shut with 9 smooth words and a stillness like deep water, and Junia had obeyed and never looked again. She had swept exactly the dirt she was pointed at and left untouched the older, deeper, cleaner thing that ran beneath. And she understood now, promotion cord heavy on her shoulder, that she would never know whether the thing she'd been aimed at had been the worst thing in Akira or merely the most expendable. Whether Lethira Vale had used her to clean the city, or to clean the one stain that competed with the High Magistrate's own for the city's justice system, to remove, in the guise of reform, a clumsy rival operation that trafficked in the same currency Vale trafficked in, and to do it through a girl too junior to ever ask what the currency was. Junia Varo stood in the marble hall with the double cord on her shoulder and understood that she would never know. That was the trap of the clean hand, it left you no number to check. She had done good, real good, freed the wrongly caged, jailed the corrupt, made the law briefly honest. And she had done it as an instrument, aimed by a hand whose full purpose she could not see, at a target chosen for reasons that might have been justice and might have been something wearing justice's robe, and there was no ledger anywhere that would ever reconcile which. She thought about leaving. For a season she thought about it seriously, handing back the double cord, going down to District 7 and a broker's honest counting house where the numbers meant only what they said and no one's hand moved hers. She did not leave, and the reason she did not leave was the thing that made her, in the end, not disillusioned but grown, which are different, and the difference is the whole of what the 10 weeks taught her. Because she sat with it in her new office for a long time and did the honest arithmetic of her own position, and it came out like this. She had been used. Yes, her integrity had been an instrument in a hand she couldn't see. Yes, but the wrongly caged were still freed, the corrupt were still fallen. The good she'd done was not made false by having been aimed. A broom sweeps real dirt whoever holds it, and the freed prisoners did not walk less free for having been freed by an instrument. And the alternative to being the broom was not clean hands. The alternative was leaving the broom in the corner for the next junior, or for no one, leaving the network to run another 15 years, leaving the wrongly caged to rot, so that Junia Varo could stand outside it all with her purity intact and her hands, precisely, clean and having changed nothing. That was the disillusioned choice, and she could see the shape of the person who made it, righteous, unused, and useless. So she stayed, but she stayed changed, with her eyes open, which was the only honest way left to stay. She would work inside the apparatus, and do real good with real arithmetic, and free the wrongly caged where she could reach them, and she would never again mistake being handed a thread for having found it. She would ask now every time the question she'd been too dazzled to ask at the start. Why me, why this thread, why now, and what is being left standing while I sweep? She would not always get the answer. She was fairly sure she would never get the answer to special custody, and she had decided carefully, coldly, to stay alive by not pulling that particular thread, which was its own kind of knowledge, but she would ask. An idealist who asks whose hand is on the broom is not a disillusioned idealist. She is an adult one, which is the only kind that lasts, and the only kind that is any actual use to the wrongly caged, who do not need her pure and do need her there. Junia Varo took up her new remit, in the great cold apparatus of the civic order, under a high magistrate whose full nature she would never learn and whose patient total attention she would feel on her, from time to time, across the years, and never be able to name. She did good work. She freed people who deserved freeing. She rose. And every time a thread was handed to her, cleanly, by a hand from above, she turned it over first and looked hard at what it was attached to, and at what conspicuously it was not, and if she could not always follow the second thread, she at least, unlike the girl who'd walked dazzled down the marble corridor in her third week, always knew that it was there. That was the whole of her education, and it had cost her nothing but her innocence, which she had come, in time, to consider a fair price, and even a bargain, for the ability to keep her eyes open in a house of very clean hands.